if you can define the facts and if you can define common sense for people, that limits the discussion. You know, if everything you ever see tells you about the suffering and about how minimum wage is a good thing and how it's going to bring people out of poverty, and you never see the other half of that, when you get to voting age, when you start paying attention to politics, what are you going to think?
The nonprofit news. So who's really paying for it? But first, subscribe and like our channel. Click on that little bell icon for notifications. And please find the Devil's Advocate podcast on your favorite listening app. Cory Gaines runs the Colorado Accountability Project. How long have you been doing this?
All the way back to, I think, probably summer of 2020, not too long after the COVID shutdowns.
All right, and for those people who don't know, you're a writer for Complete Colorado, which is a news service run by some evil nonprofit. But you've also been doing this Substack called the Colorado Accountability Project, and it is spectacular. You are a one-man machine asking questions about local government, state government, and doing this crazy thing of calling people up or emailing them and asking them for clarification on what's going on. And it's amazing what you get. Why'd you want to do this, by the way?
Well, originally it started mainly as a response to the government shutting things down in COVID. And the more I learned, the more I started finding causes that were important to me. And the more I got interested in certain topics. And so I just kind of went from there. I've always been a really curious guy. I like asking questions. I like learning things. And then having learned them, turning around and sharing with other people.
What I think you do so well is you're an example of what one person can do just by poking around and shining light on things that they don't want you to shine light on all sorts of governmental levels, all sorts of little nooks and crannies that most of us go, I bet there's something there, but we never really go through and ask the questions and do the information requests and the Cora requests. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
All right. So Independence Institute hosts something called CompleteColorado.com. You are one of our stars on that. You write for us, and we appreciate it. It's a great news aggregator, CompleteColorado.com. And Independence Institute pays for it. It's us. But we see out in the regular newspaper world, there are all these different type of new, not-for-profit, collaborative journalistic enterprises. And they sound so good because, journalism is dying and this is a way to breathe life into it. The not-for-profit space is gonna take care of it. But I always wonder, who are they and really what is their mission? So tell me a little bit about who they are.
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, one thing that I have seen a fair bit of is more of the smaller local papers, which used to be for-profit, turning into nonprofits.
Like what?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. There's some, unfortunately, I can't call to name a particular one right now, but I'm thinking down south, I want to almost say Alamosa off the top of my head. There's some tiny local papers, which then, we can't make it as a regular for-profit newspaper because things have changed in the world. And so they turn nonprofit. But there are also a whole host of other ones which around, say, for example, the Colorado Sun started out as a certified B corporation, if memory serves correctly, and have since moved to become a nonprofit. So there's kind of a mix. I think what drives a lot of it, one of the things that I've heard a lot of in looking into this issue is there's a lot of fear and concern about losing local newspapers, which I completely understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
My own local paper out where I live in Sterling is great. The folks that run it are doing a great job because otherwise, how on earth would I find out, say, that they're trying to figure out what to do with the new rec center in town? they have someone who, God bless her, goes to every school board meeting, sitting there taking notes, and suffers the brain damage that I'm sure that entails, so that that can be reported on and people in town can learn about it.
But what are these groups I keep hearing about? Collab, and then is it Newswire? I'm trying to remember.
Well, yeah. So
And so there's Chalkbeat. There are all these, specialty news services, and I never know what to believe of them, especially since they're paid for by rather liberal people.
Yeah, indeed. And what you're finding is so when these things turn nonprofit, and they'll get support from things like Collab, not material support per se, but support in terms of
What is
expertise
Collab?
and knowledge.
The Colorado Collaborative
News service. I
news
can't
service.
remember off the top
And
of my
it's some people get paid to run around and help, and it just sounds great. Help small papers do their job better. I don't think there's any conservatives among them.
No. And there isn't also for things like you will see from time to time, the Sun will run things by Kaiser Family Foundation. They'll run things by Chalkbeat. It's less frequent. They might run things by, say, Newsline, or they'll reference something from Colorado Times Recorder, or I can't call the name of it off the top of my head, but it's the Kaiser Family Foundation, and among others. And what's going on often with things like that is those articles, and I've started seeing it in smaller outlets as well. So a couple of Western Slope papers like Grand Junction Sentinel and Mesa.
So you're talking about stories that in the past, the Associated Press would, somebody writes a story, they're a reporter for the Longmont Times or something, and he writes a story, and the folks up at Fort Collins go, well, actually, that kind of affects us. So we grab his piece, say it's an AP story, and put it in. That's been going on for 100 years. What's different about having Newsline? Is it Newsline? I'm trying to remember the name.
Newsline is one of them. Yeah.
Newsline, or Colorado Times Recorder, or the Kaiser Family Foundation and their health reporter, which are paid for by people who I think have an axe to grind.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's the thing.
But if a paper wants to just pick them up and say, just like it was an AP story, we think that it's an AP style story.
Right. And it's free. That's why they love it. But the issue is that when you start looking back at those organizations, say, for example, Colorado Newsline, what you find is they get funded by a whole bunch of left-leaning causes. And you don't always know exactly who is funding them either. Colorado Newsline, as an example, they get their funding from States Newsroom, which is a national organization.
States Newsroom.
Yes,
all right,
sir.
So you have Newsline here.
Is a chapter of States Newsroom, the national organization.
And when you say they get this for free, just so people follow us.
Right.
It's if you're running a small town newspaper, if you want an AP story, you have to be a member of the AP and you have to pay. If you have somebody else's story, you have to pay. But places like Newsline and Chalkbeat and others, I'm sure please take our work for free. So you're running a paper, and it's tough to make ends meet, and somebody offers you free content that sure looks like good journalism. Be fool not to take it.
I would, yeah. But the thing is that it's not. I don't know how to put this. These organizations that are running this content are being funded by, among others, a bunch of left-leaning foundations. And they can't not but want to influence what kind of coverage gets into those papers. And so when I've talked with people, because I've emailed with the editors at these papers, or it will say on their website, our contributors do not have any editorial decision-making. Okay. I mean, I don't know if the picture that they figure is in everybody's mind is that there's a guy from, say, for example, States Newsroom gets money from, they originally got started from the Hopewell Fund, and I believe they get money from the North Fund. both of those are children of Arabella Investments, which anybody that's read the blueprint would recognize that name, a giant leftist dark money conglomeration. And they're giving money to States Newsroom. So I don't figure that there's somebody from Arabella or North Fund looking over the shoulder of the reporter as they types and say, now, put in something about needing to have every homeless person gets a house. I don't think that's going on, and I think that's what the editors say.
Arabella is putting money into an organization. They're doing it for a reason.
Exactly.
And the most beautiful thing about journalism is it is the propaganda arm, in that we put this stuff out by story selection and by the words they use. They impact how people perceive politics in this state. It is a remarkably great investment that the left does so well. The right doesn't do very well. What a surprise. The right doesn't do much well in Colorado. And what a long-term play to say, hey, here, I'm going to write your stories for you in the terms I want.
Yeah, and so, like I say, I don't think there's anybody leaning over their shoulder telling them what to do, but you can't ignore the incentive structure here. The North Fund is not going and saying, write lots of, going to, say, the Sum and Substance, which tends to be pretty business friendly, and saying, we want to support you because we like what you do. They go to papers that write the kinds of things that the North Fund wants to be written. And then they give them money. And they say, go forth and write. And they know that, say, for example, Colorado Newsline is going to be writing about the kinds of things the North Fund wants to have out there. And that becomes sort of the beginning of how, if you can define the facts and if you can define common sense for people, that limits the discussion. If everything you ever see tells you about the suffering and about how minimum wage is a good thing and how it's going to bring people out of poverty, and you never see the other half of that, when you get to voting age, when you start paying attention to politics, what are you going to think? Having been fed a steady diet of this, you're never going to ask.
I'll go a little even further, that while newspapers don't have the same pull that they used to, the same gravitas that they used to, elected officials don't feel that way. Because when an elected official sees his or her name in any paper, they get very twitchy very quickly. And so the right story here affects the guy on the city council or on the school board or in the committee room at the state capitol, when something back home is writing something saying this is a bad idea or showing only one side of it. And so you see Colorado Newsline pop up in newsprint like it's an AP-style story, but I've never seen, when a paper grabs one of their stories, to say, Newsline, a liberal news service, a progressive news service. You just think it's a flat AP-style story. And it ain't.
Most of the time, and I actually wrote this in one of my recent op-eds, where it was the way they are characterized by these papers is anything from saying they just have Newsline as part of a, I forget the name, Digital Blocks Collective. Or it'll be Newsline is a nonprofit, public benefit, public charity news organization. If you have questions, contact Quentin Young at blah, blah, blah.com or whatever. But they never characterize it. And the funny thing is that a lot of these news organizations call themselves progressive. Colorado Times Recorder is one of them. Colorado Newsline came from States Newsroom, which originally referred to itself as a progressive news organization. And even if they don't characterize themselves, it doesn't take long reading this stuff to see it. Good Lord. You start reading the articles and it is readily apparent. Just like it would be reading Fox that oh, well, this is a conservative news organization. But you always know what you're getting with the other stuff, except if you're some guy in Kiowa and you're reading your local Kiowa paper, and up comes this article about, hey, here's some ballot measures you might want to be watching. because they might cost you money. You start reading through it. And some of these ballot measures, they leave off one, say, about abortion, or when they talk about that railway going through Uinta Canyon, they only talk to certain people, and it's a ratio. I forget the exact number. It was like 13-1 ratio of talking to proponents versus opponents. It's tilted.
Now, the right tried some of this. I'm trying to remember the news service. I always say Square State, but it's I'm blanking.
Center Square?
Center Square, thank you. I know there was. So Center Square kind of did the same sort of thing. They were a national outfit, and they had local reporters, and they would put more. I don't know if conservative is the right term, but they would put in stories, and they were an interesting counter to that. I remember in the Gazette would run some of their stories every now and then until the left had conniptions and started making a lot of noise and saying, "Oh, look what you're doing! You're taking conservative news services and you're putting it." And the Gazette sort of backed off on that. I do not see the same organization when it comes to calling out these other Newsline and Collab and all these other left-leaning organizations. I don't see people on the right going, "That's not news. That's bias. Pull it out of your paper," because our side just isn't that organized.
I would agree,
and we don't pay people to do it. And I guarantee you, the pressure that newspapers felt from Center Square, it was paid. There is somebody who makes a living to make sure those stories don't go out.
Right. And or a bunch of volunteers who started an email campaign at the behest of someone, probably. I was reminded a little bit of, I don't know if you've probably seen the bumper stickers like, "Don't steal, the government hates competition." I was thinking about that when you were talking about the Center Square stuff. Yeah, like, don't steal because the left-leaning news organizations hate the competition. It's there. Maybe part of it could be that people on the conservative side of things have been talking about left-leaning bias in the media so long. Maybe it's just like it's alarm fatigue. You just stop paying attention.
And that's a shame because it doesn't take that long. Let me tell you a story. So when I was a columnist for the Denver Post, I was told over and over again I was their most read columnist. And obviously their most hated columnist because it's a liberal newspaper and a liberal editorial section. And I got the most delicious hate that every column, the comment section was just, always blasting me. And there were about, 8 to 12 regulars who, no matter what I said, would always say a variation of the same theme, which is, what an embarrassment for the Denver Post to have him on. Why do they give him real estate? This is a terrible, this only reflects poorly on the Post. It was always kind of directed at them that, my God, you look bad because you're carrying Caldera.
Oh,
and then one week I wrote a column, and none of them wrote any hate. None of them. I loved their hate. And it hit me that, well, one of a few things happened. Either I wrote something that they all agreed with, which would be remarkable, or they all happened to go on vacation at the same time, or it's the same guy who missed a week because he was out of town or something. So all these fake accounts, there's a guy who gets paid, some little troll who gets paid, and lo and behold, when I made this sin in saying that there are two sexes, that's when the tripwire broke and they fired me. So, but they had 4 years of that hate built up. Say, what an embarrassment! What an embarrassment! What an embarrassment! And that's their job. Their job is to cancel. And the right does not have anybody who's going to cancel the local paper from using Newsline or Colorado Times Recorder or Colorado Sun or CPR for that matter.
Well, I would say that if anybody has concerns, I would contact your paper. If you have concerns about what they're running or if you have thoughts about it, contact them.
How would you do that?
And I usually I go to their page, I go all the way to the bottom, look for contact us, and find the boss. I just send them an email. And I've done that with, well, the Colorado Sun has stopped answering my emails. My guess is that at some point a Colorado Sun-wide email went out which said, this name, just don't answer.
He's a gadfly, don't.
Something. CPR with decent regularity will. Some yes, some no. But I would just email them. And I've emailed reporters too, because so here's one of the things. One of the other parts of this picture is there was a recent, it was a pretty big grant, 400,000, something like that, from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to CPR, KUNC.
CPR, by the way, is Colorado Public Radio for people who don't know.
KUNC, which is public radio in northern Colorado, and RCCC, FRCC, it's on the western slope, I forget the name of it, and the Colorado Sun. And they're all to share this grant, and it's going to help fund news from the Capitol, which then will be shared among these different outlets, among other things. And so the thing is that if it is funded by that grant, that's your money. Those are your tax dollars. You didn't get to choose. If somebody wants to donate to the Sun, God bless, go donate, whatever. But if it's CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, you didn't get to pick. And one of the big concerns I have is with that news, where is there going to be any reflection of the diversity and the differences of opinion that are all over Colorado? Because if we're all funding this, we should all have a hand in what gets discussed and what gets said. And some of these news organizations are pretty good about that, and some are not. KUNC is a really good one. The Colorado Sun is not. CPR is somewhere in the middle. So I would say
CPR has a slant, and, they do it so well, but every one of their stories seems to come from the oppressed/oppressor viewpoint.
Yeah.
You know, so those of us who see the world in a liberty versus coercion viewpoint, there's nothing there for us. And I used to be a religious listener to CPR. By the way, great guys. I mean, I know a lot of the reporters, and they're great guys. But the lack of diversity is shattering. Yeah. And they, for God's sake, they can't see it. They have blinders on, and they think, one, that there is diversity there because there's racial diversity, and therefore that must be diversity. And two, that we're professional enough, we've learned enough that we strain any bias out of our stories. But for, when I read their stuff and it says, we're there to represent Colorado and, diverse, it's like, what horse crap. It was just, and they're so blind to it. And our tax money goes to it. Our tax money goes to the Sun. Why is our tax money going to a private organization, the Sun? Good question.
I know CPR, a small percentage of their regular funding is from government. A lot of it comes from private stuff. But this $400,000 grant, that's a good question. It brings up a larger issue with regard to being a nonprofit newsroom. You get certain advantages from the government that regular for-profit businesses don't. And newspapers, by their very nature, are going to have to encounter and reckon with the political landscape around them. And so how is that going to be fair, and how is that going to be fairly done? Because if somebody had, for example, an issue with a guy getting up on the pulpit on Sunday and telling people how to vote and telling them that they should do this and they should do that with regard to politics, if you have an issue with that, how would it be any better to have a nonprofit paper with biases, whether right or left? I don't care. But if they have their biases in what they're covering and what they're saying, and they have that same sort of nonprofit status as a church, and they're out there doing stuff that's overtly political, how is that any better? That's been a big concern of mine for years now.
So Independence Institute has been doing Complete Colorado for, 17 years. To see the Sun and CPR get tax money, $400,000, we don't get that.
Nope.
We don't get that. In fact, we don't get any funding that is specifically designated for our news work. We take all that out of our general funds to try to put this service out for Coloradans to get a different viewpoint of news and views. And there's no grant that's for here. There's nobody saying, "Oh, I love what you do here and use that money for this." No, we have to reach in our pockets to make that happen. I think that once you start accepting government money, then we have a right to know what goes on in your business. And we have a right to say, if you're going to do that, you need to have not just diversity of skin color and genitals, you need to have diversity of ideology in your news services. And one token editorialist is not that. And I've brought this up to many people, including at CPR, and I got a kind of a cold shoulder on it, which is, one, I think it's hard for them to find reporters who have a different viewpoint. I think there's a self-selection that goes into journalism.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
But there was a self-selection that went into all sorts of Jim Crow as well. And you had to go out and try to find some racial diversity. If these news services and these companies spent a tenth of their effort that they spend on DEI and celebrating the oppressed oppressor stories and celebrating racism, they did a tenth of that towards getting true ideological diversity on the reporting, Colorado would be so much better off. We'd see different stories, we'd hear different viewpoints, and I wouldn't feel like I'm hated when I listen to CPR. I can't do it anymore because for me, it's like they're just advertising. You are not welcome here.
I would add geographic diversity to that as well. Coming from a rural area of the state, I can't tell you how grating it is to me, and I know I've talked with other people, that the rural reporter is some 20-year-old import from Philadelphia who's going to start covering Colorado ag. And part of that, that grant that came down, I remember it's the Western Slope Public Radio, and God save me, I can't remember the name, but they put in there in their announcement that, we're going to hire a rural climate reporter. I was like, hey, that is great. Finally, there's going to be somebody who's going to be going to rural areas and talking about the rural-urban divide in this state, because that's a big conversation we need to have. No. I never heard back. I asked, but from what I could see, rural climate means they're going to be talking about climate change in rural areas, which, okay, that's important, but about rural-urban divide. And it's not like there's a lack of them. There's people that are reporters in my town who could be hired by someone in the Front Range or do freelance and write about rural issues because they've lived here their whole lives.
Even the whole idea that it's an environmental reporter. All right, call it what it is. This is an environmentalist reporter. And by story selection, you're going to be talking about certain stories. One of the tricks that they use constantly, particularly on environmental stories, is never putting things in context. I love when you hear about a new regulation that takes away some of our liberty, but it's going to save 2 tons of carbon from being put into the atmosphere every year. And you go, wow, man, that's a lot. But they never put it into context. Which is what percentage of all the carbon that we create in Colorado? Nothing. It's even in the Gazette and other papers I've seen environmental reporting saying, we're going to put these charging stations everywhere. We got another grant for this, without saying what the cost was and what the opportunity cost is.
That's a big one.
Of that. Nobody, and if you had a conservative or libertarian in that newsroom, what would happen is that somebody would say, hey, that was a great article you wrote, but why didn't you mention the cost? Maybe I should mention that next time.
Yeah.
The product would be better. When I say I feel alienated from the news, like I'm not welcome. And CPR is probably the king of that because they're so slick. They're so, when you have news with sound effects and music, music is used to set tone. That's why it's in movies. That's why they have scores. So the somber music comes in as we talk about some sad subject about the earth or homelessness. You're manipulating the news. Where do people go who aren't like that? And I don't think they get the hatred that they are getting. These people elected Trump. They didn't see it before. I don't know if they see it now, but their smug elitism in the news to a vast group of people is hateful.
I agree.
It's hateful to me, and it drives me to vote for guys like Donald Trump.
I think what you often see out of news orgs like this is exactly what you're saying. I can't tell you the number of times I've read articles and I keep thinking, like, if there was just one, even independent, middle of the road guy in the chain of creation for this article, I can't imagine how much different this thing would have looked. And I can't, like, there is, you pick it up, some reporters are worse than others. I don't want to make a blanket statement about them all, but there is this sort of sneering arrogance about people that don't believe the way they do. And I would go further that you pick up sometimes too, and again, I don't know if it's intentional either way, but this sort of sneering arrogance about people who live outside of an urban metro area like Denver. It's those people. And I think to myself,
you Hicks.
Yeah. I remember way back in COVID talking about the vaccines. And it was this discussion that the narrative being pushed at the time was it's conservatives and it's rural areas and they just don't trust, and if they could only trust the government. And I kept thinking to myself,
worse than that. If you don't get the shot, you are killing people.
Right. And I kept thinking to myself,
wow, what a statement.
Yeah. That, well, wait a minute. For a long time, vaccine hesitancy was a mark of affluent, white, well-educated people, like the pertussis outbreak in a daycare in Boulder.
Yeah.
But of course, that never made it into the stories about vaccine hesitancy. So yeah, I would still encourage people. I watch a variety of news. I watch from the left and from the right. And I can't tell you the number of times I have started out with NPR on the car and made it about 10 minutes and shut the damn thing off because I'm angry or I just can't take hearing about transgender patio furniture for when there's more important things to discuss. I mean, if you like whatever, I don't care about that. But, and then I would encourage people to reach out to reporters. Don't be nasty and don't be mean. But I'd encourage people to reach out to news organization and reporters and say, hey, I noticed you left this out. Why?
Do you often get a real response when you do that?
It depends on the person. There are some reporters, one of them's at CPR, and a genuinely good man. We don't agree politically, but a genuinely good and open man. KUNC is another organization. We're not going to agree, and maybe they don't change their news that much. Maybe they don't consider changing their article, but they've sort of been put on notice. I've also had, it's rare, I've had one or two be nasty, but whatever. I mean, I taught 9th grade. I have a thick hide. I don't care. Most of the time, what it is you get ignored. But the way I figure it's like when I testify in front of boards or in front of the legislature, at least they're not going to think that no one, like they won't be able to say that no one's paying attention, and they won't be able to say that everybody agrees. They've been told. Whether they respond, whether they change, at least they can't look at themselves and say, I'm doing God's work and no one disagrees with me.
Let me go one further. When the left cancels people, and they cancel people, they don't just go after the company. They go after the advertisers. They go after the customers of that company. Colorado was home for the first Media Matters that was local.
Yep.
And they would come after me all the time. until bitch slap gate happened. And I used the term bitch slap on the radio. And that was a sexist term. And all of a sudden, Progress Now and others were piling on saying, we got to get rid of Kildare, you got to fire him. And what was fascinating was how well done it was. It's kind of what Colorado Times Recorder does, is that they build up a dossier on the terrible things you have said or done. And then when it's time to cancel you, they've got a warehouse full of, look at the terrible things you've said in the past.
Right.
Ari Armstrong, another columnist for Complete, did a search and found out that the guys who were calling for my firing used the term bitch slap several times in their own editorial writing. So the whole thing just blew up, and it was just spectacular, and they went out of business because of that. Media Matters had to close up their shop. It was just delicious. But they go after the sponsors. Do you ever talk to the sponsors? Do you ever call all those wonderful underwriters known as advertisers at CPR and go, did you see this story? Did you find that offensive? Or this only says one side. Why are you sponsoring this type of uneven stuff?
I never have. I might start. Something to think about for sure.
I think it's...
And that would be something other people could go to.
Because it's one thing when Cory Gaines writes a letter saying this is awful, but when one of their advertisers, sponsorships, say, I'm getting some feedback that this reflects poorly on my business, that's where they listen.
I could see that, yeah. I wouldn't wonder too, like with some of them, you would play hell trying to figure out who to write. Because it is a twisted web of funding for a lot of these nonprofits.
That's why getting back to the nonprofits is so wonderful, because it's dark money, and which they're free to do. It's great. But the newspaper that picks up Newsline,
right?
They have advertisers. And do those advertisers know that Newsline is a leftist propaganda arm? Do they know that Colorado Times Recorder is funded for one purpose, and that's to take out political opponents? And it's a wonderful long-term play. Stapleton had a picture of his grandfather in his office. Oh my God!
Right. And
the grandfather was in the Klan. Oh my God! And that's now locked away and forever on the internet to be pulled out later. And it was pulled out.
Yeah.
It's just that's silly. But it's enough. It's a little bit, it's a little bit more hay, a little bit more hay, and then finally the last straw. And those people are canceled. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I think that would be a good, if your local paper is carrying things by Colorado Times Recorder or Colorado Newsline, I would contact the paper first. And if you find something particularly onerous or offensive, start contacting the sponsors. Because, they've got a reputation and they've got some skin in the game. So I think contacting them would be a good idea. I have yet to do that, though. I have tried to reach out to a few of the funders that will fund these things. You don't really get anywhere. Because like you say, they're 501c3s, and they're not going to tell, especially me, piddling old me in Sterling, Colorado, they're not going to tell me anything. So
no, and that's because they've got a political agenda. That's why they're funding these so-called news services, because they want a political outcome in the future. They're not stupid. And they actually do the investment that the right in Colorado refuses to do. That type of long-term investment in infrastructure to change narratives. When you change narratives, you change elections.
Yeah, they have the patience of Job, and they know how to get in there, and like you say, they're setting common sense in Colorado by, it's not editorial control where they're saying, you will write this, you will put it in your paper. But they're going to these organizations who do what they like, who talk about the things that they like, and they say, We want you to do more of that. We want more focus on homeless people and drug addictions and safe use. And sometimes they even go so far as to fund reporters. Like the Colorado Sun is getting a reporter funded by a charitable foundation. Yeah, it's right there out in front.
These are the same foundations that have funded people to be in the governor's cabinet as well. There's the environmental. Here's your environmental guy. We'll pay for him. Brilliant stuff. But if Exxon ever paid for somebody to help you out in your energy office, could you imagine hell that would be paid?
Right.
And there's the double standard again.
Right. Or they say, they have no editorial control. And I remember asking somebody once, I didn't get a response, but I remember asking something like, well, would you take an article or an op-ed written by Trump and put it as an article? Or would you, say, for example, allow an oil company to sponsor you? You don't let them have any editorial control. So what do you care? Would you ever let an oil company? But that would never happen. They would get. You talk about angry emails. They'd be getting them left and right from their viewers about that.
Let's wrap it up with this. You are an anomaly in so many ways. One, you take action, you shine light on this stuff, but you just keep doing it. The left acts just like you. They have armies of people just like Cory Gaines who will pick up the phone and go, why are you doing this? Or why are you doing that? And they have armies of them, and it's changed the state over the course of a decade. It's not rocket surgery. It's just hard work.
Yeah.
And if there were more of you, if there were more Cory Gaines, if there were more Natalie Mettens, if there were more Brandon Works, if there were more of the handful of freedom fighters out there who toil at this for a principle, if it turned into from 3 to 300 to 3,000, the course of this state would change. But I have found that conservatives, libertarians, don't like getting their hands dirty. They don't like that boring work of actually engaging politely where change can happen. It's more fun just to bitch about it and go back to your job.
I agree, but it is critical. One of the things that's happened post-election 2024, I don't know if it's just my intuition or my hope or what, but I have sensed maybe a little bit more interest and more momentum by independents and conservatives. And I was talking with my friend the other night, and he said that his mother-in-law reads my stuff pretty regularly. I'm like, I thought she was pretty liberal. I'm surprised at that. And his remark was, you have to understand how many people are really, even Democrats, are really upset with the way that things are going and that with the tilt that the Democrat Party has taken. And I sensed a little bit of momentum, and I would like to, I would hope that we could capitalize on that. I think people sometimes figure if you either have to do nothing or you have to be super involved, and that is not the case. Pick a thing, one thing, make that your thing, and get involved. I mean, I have a job, I have a child, I have a wife and a mortgage and a house and everything else. And but you could pick one thing and you could get involved in one thing. Follow a board. Write to CPR once a month if you see something objectionable. It doesn't need to be a full-time job. But speak up, because as you can see, a bunch of people in election 2024 spoke up, and look at what happened. It didn't change Colorado much, but can you imagine if the people that voted this last election started speaking up in other ways besides just their vote, how much different this state would look? It's not going to go back to being Republican, but it could be less like communist, leftist, progressive than it is now.
And to your point, a lot of good liberals, I mean that genuine, good liberals, They don't want corruption in government. They want open records. They want open meetings. They want to see what the budgets are. They want to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And they believe in the process more than the outcome. You know, when you and I were kids, we heard it all the time. The ends don't justify the means. And there's still a bunch of people who believe that, might have different political viewpoints than us, but they want the system not to be rigged like this. And having liberal, progressive, nonprofit foundations fund your news media is choosing winners and losers. And for newspapers to be conned into carrying that stuff, it makes those newspapers useful idiots.
Yeah. And it is just another extension of the political machine in this state that's been running things with big money and oftentimes big out-of-state money for a long time. And this state should be reflective of the people that live in it. Even if we politically disagree, I don't care. But I want our state to be reflective of the people that live in it and the values of the people that live here, as opposed to some big money out-of-state person who thinks, here's how Colorado ought to run.
Well, they bought and paid for it, and they own it now. Cory Gardner, thank you so much. Again, the Substack is Colorado Accountability Project, and you're writing for CompleteColorado.com. That's CompleteColorado.com. You should go there every day. Cory, thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.